What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and it occurred to me recently that I have very little FaceTime on my channel, and I kind of feel like it'd be cool to bump that up a little bit, So I like the idea of just kind of talking to you guys about stuff, about things that involve, comic books and so on and so forth. Not necessarily just explaining things. I mean, this will be an explanation of sorts, but just talking about things that I think are kind of cool. In this video, I want to talk about Infinity War, and I want to talk about Thor's new hammer, Stormbreaker. I almost said Storm's new hammer, Thor. Thor's new hammer, Stormbreaker. This is cool. Now, for those people who are familiar with Marvel Comics, you probably know the significance of this. But for those of you guys who don't, Stormbreaker is, well, really, it's kind of a landmark thing. So back in Thor issues 354 to 357, I think it was. Maybe it was 357 to 359. I can't remember. Anyway, back when Walt Simonson was writing Thor, he introduced a character by the name of Beta Ray Bill. Now, Beta Ray Bill is one of the most important characters in the history of Marvel Comics because Beta Ray Bill was the first person in Marvel Comics to lift Thor's hammer. Now, we'll talk about the significance of that here in a second, but in terms of what this means for the MCU, we know that right now, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, is basically broken. It's destroyed. There's no... Well, it seems like there's no real bringing it back, but it is a mainstay of his character. It's like Captain America without the shield. It's like Wolverine without adamantium claws. It's part and parcel to who he is. It's one of the most recognizable attributes of his character. To get rid of that seems almost kind of like destroying the character to a degree, like eliminating a core part of who the Thor character is, regardless of who's playing the role of Thor, who the Thor character is. And so I think that the hammer will make its return in the MCU. Like it'll show back up. And when it does, what's going to happen with Thor's new hammer? Now, here's how I think that's going to play out. One of the things that people tend to forget when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that at the end of the day, it all really is just world building. That's the basis of the MCU. It's confined to world building with regards to like the Avengers, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Captain America, Thor, the Incredible Hulk, different things like that. But it is basically world building. I would go as far as to say the introduction of Stormbreaker is like a more scaled down version of like an origin film, right? I mean, let's take, for example, Captain America. So we know that when Marvel announced they wanted to bring Captain America into the MCU, it was like, okay, we're going to see Captain America, basically the de facto leader of the Avengers. What this meant was they had to do an origin story for him. They had to tell us how Steve Rogers became Captain America. That's the first film. At the end of the first film, we got a post-credit scene, and really kind of like an end scene where he goes on to basically wake up in the modern day, and that segues into the modern day Captain America as we most recognize him. But the first movie sets the character up. The second movie turns them into the character that we know. The only really exception to that is Iron Man. And the reason why that works for Iron Man is because with his character, he was kind of the start of the MCU. So they really kind of had to go for broke. They really couldn't just like create an origin story and then end the movie on him becoming Iron Man. He had to become Iron Man halfway through. And it worked, it served its purpose. But the fact remains here, when it comes to Stormbreaker, I would say this introduction of this hammer in the MCU is not for Thor. I mean, Thor's going to use it, but it doesn't serve the purpose of saying, like, this is Thor's new weapon. It serves the purpose of saying, this is his new weapon temporarily until he gets his new hammer back, or gets his old hammer back, and then what he'll get, and then what'll happen is, like, Stormbreaker will pass on to Beta Ray Bill. I think that's what this is designed to do, is to bring Beta Ray Bill into the MCU. Now, one of the big questions people will have is, well, how do you make that work? Beta Ray Bill's never been introduced before. How do you introduce him into the MCU? In all honesty, you introduce him with Infinity War. And that seems to be the significance of this movie. That's the cool thing. We're going to see a lot of superheroes in Infinity War. We're going to see, 60, 70 different superheroes in Infinity War. But I think this movie is going to serve the purpose of kind of setting the stage for the next phase of the MCU. That's what Avengers 1 did. Avengers 1 saw all the superheroes we'd seen so far team up. And then in turn, that set the stage for the next phase of the MCU, which is, well, what happens now that they're all teamed up? What kind of events can we see unfolding and different things like that? What kind of dynamics of the individual characters? Will they mesh? Will they not mesh? That's basically what that movie was designed to do. I think what Infinity War is going to do is give us Beta Ray Bill in the exact same capacity that we got from Walt Simonson, but with the circumstances slightly modified. So in the original Walt Simonson story, what ended up happening, the way he wrote this out, Beta Ray Bill was kind of like a protector, a leader of sorts for a race called the Corbinites. And they were leaving what used to be their home world and setting out for greener pastures, setting out for a better world. During this whole travel, this whole movement from one place to the next. Nick Fury at S.H.I.E.L.D. had picked up the fact that this ship was passing through the solar system, and he contacted Thor to check it out. So he sends Thor over. Thor encounters Beta Ray Bill. Beta Ray Bill believes that Thor is an enemy against the Corbinites since, Beta Ray Bill's job is to protect everybody. The two of them get into a scuffle. Beta Ray Bill overpowers Thor. Now, back then when the story was told, Thor had this caveat, and the idea was that if he lost his hammer for 60 seconds, then he would turn back into Donald Blake. And so what ended up happening is he lost possession of his hammer, and then Beta Ray Bill picked it up. And that was huge when that happened. I mean, I wasn't reading comics at the time when that happened, but from what I gather, looking at letters pages and looking at different articles and reading books by Les Daniels and all the different things that go into like the history of comics, it was massive when that took place. It was landmark because no one had ever lifted Thor's hammer before. It was like he was the only one that could do it. And so because of that, this ultimately led to Odin bringing the two of them to Asgard and having them engage in a battle of sorts. Whoever won would basically be allowed to wield Mjolnir, would become the new Thor. Now, I want to say that Odin's son won, and Beta Ray Bill was given Stormbreaker by Odin because Odin basically looked into his heart and realized that his motives were true, that he was there as a protector. He wasn't really there as like a villain or anything like that. And so going forward, Beta Ray Bill had his own hammer. It looks slightly different actually it looks strikingly different from Mjolnir, but still, he had his own hammer, and he would show up from time to time. He was kind of like this blood brother. He and Thor had this blood pact. The two of them would always stand side by side, if at all possible. When Thor called out for help, Beta Ray Bill would always answer if it was, remotely possible. And there have been circumstances where that hasn't happened, but for the most part, it's just a way for Marvel to kind of bring his character in and have him face off alongside Thor. But I think that's what's going to happen in the MCU. Instead of it being the Corbinites, it could just be that Beta Ray Bill is basically a protector of what's left of like the Nova Corps, right? Like we know that, for example, that Thanos is going to get the Power Stone. Most likely he already has it. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to show Thanos just decimating the Nova Corps. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, those of you guys who don't know, who don't read Marvel Comics, no way the Nova Corps stands a chance against Thanos. Not a chance. I mean, they're cool and it's interesting, but like if Thanos shows up on the Nova Corps homeworld, Nova Prime, whatever you want to call it. Actually Xandar in the comics. But if he shows up on Xandar and says like, it's time for me to get the Power Stone, then like woe betide the poor souls who are on that planet at that time, because like they're all gonna die. Like that's that's just the way it is. And so Thanos will most likely just decimate Xandar, getting the Power Stone, and in turn, I imagine Beta Ray Bill being a protector of what's left. Not that he'll be a Nova, but he'll be just a protector or like one of the people who's there. And some circumstance may arise, something may happen, he may or may not pick up Thor's hammer, but the idea is that that'll set the introduction for his character. Now, in terms of what that leads into with regards to like how he actually lifts the hammer of Thor, whether he becomes worthy or something like that, honestly, I kind of feel like the significance of Beta Ray Bill lifting the hammer of Thor was somewhat squandered on Vision. Vision's cool, but it wasn't necessary for Vision to pick up the hammer of Thor to show his significance. He could have done that in any number of ways. It was interesting, but I kind of felt like that should have been left to Beta Ray Bill. I think it really would have like put his character on the map, because it's one thing for Marvel to introduce, Beta Ray Bill into the movies and say, hey, here's this guy who gets like the old hammer of Thor, and for people to be like, well, that's cool. And then it's another for them to say like, he gets the old hammer of Thor or he gets the new hammer of Thor, he gets Stormbreaker because he lifted Thor's old hammer. Then people are just like, whoa, that's crazy. Like that would be kind of a big deal to me. So I'm really hoping that ends up, that turns out to be the case. And again, all that I think really comes out of Infinity War. I mean, if Infinity War ends the way I think it will end with Thanos blinking out half the life in the universe. That will segue into Avengers 4. Avengers 4 will most likely give us, if it ends like the comics did, it'll basically, well, I won't ruin that, but basically it'll set to things like things being set back to rights, essentially. And I think what'll happen is with things being set back to rights, Thor will get his old hammer back. He'll get Mjolnir back. It'll be reformed or something along those lines. And then he won't have a reason for Stormbreaker anymore, and it'll pass on to Beta Ray Bill by whatever manner and whatever mean. But again, I'm just kind of spitballing here. I'm just kind of throwing my thoughts out here. I mean, there's no absolute standard to this because we don't know. We don't have an absolute rule here. There's a lot of cool possibilities that can come out of Infinity War, because what you're doing is what Marvel's doing is they're creating a story that deals with reality warping. And with reality warping comes the ability to create anything you want to, or to fix anything you want to. The movie could basically just be like a giant retcon. That's really what it could be. Infinity War ends, and then Avengers 4 happens, and Avengers 4 ends, and it's, okay, so like, because of the Infinity Gauntlet, we get back all the villains that we really loved, all the villains that we don't really care about stay dead, and then like, here's some new stuff, and some awesome things happen and so on and so forth. You know, you can literally use the power of the Infinity Gauntlet in that film to just kind of make whatever you want to. And it works because you're talking about universe level reality warping. So again, there's a lot of possibilities here. And I just want to kind of throw that out there, you know, but I'm curious what you guys think about this whole thing. Like what's your stance on this? Do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree? Do you guys think that Infinity War will be cool with regards to like seeing people die and like stuff get destroyed? But do you think that like Stormbreaker will just be Stormbreaker, it'll be destroyed, Thor will get Mjolnir back, and you think we'll never see Beta Ray Bill? I'm kind of curious what your all stance is on this. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.